Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 355 of the MTGGoldfish podcast. I'm Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have the full crew here this week, kicking things off with the owner of MTGGoldfish, Richard. How's it going this fine Monday, Richard?
Hey Seth, doing well. Just jamming some Crimson Vow, getting wrecked on Moto.
Oh, yeah, we've been talking about spoiler season for Crimson Vow for the last couple of weeks, but the set is actually out, at least on the digital clients, on Magic Online and Magic Arena, and we even have tournament results. There were some pretty big tournaments, so one of our big topics today is going to be talking about New Standard and Innistrad Crimson Vow, but before we get to that, we got another co-host in Krim. How's it going today, Krim?
Also jamming a lot of Crimson Vow, but on Arena, and mostly just running into Ranger class. So, having a miserable time playing against green. Same old Magic.
Poor Krim. Green being good.
Yep.
But anyway, yeah, that's one of our big topics for today. We're talking about New Standard and Innistrad Crimson Vow now that we've actually got to see it in practice a little bit. So that is topic number one. We also wanted to talk about a couple of other things. So we got an announcement about Innistrad double feature. There was this weird new never seen before card that popped up in a secret Lair drop that maybe says some interesting things about where Magic is heading or continues to head. And we're going to be joined by Joe Dyer, who does This Week in Legacy and Vintage 101 over on MTGGoldfish.com to talk a little bit about Eternal Weekend, and then, of course, answer your Fishmail question. So that is an overview of the cast today. Before we get into it, a reminder that our show today is brought to you by Card Conduit. And Card Conduit, you've probably heard about them from us before. They are an amazing way to sell your Magic collection, and they're offering a new service that's geared towards selling smaller batches of valuable cards with a reduced service fee. With their curated shipment service, you can sell your cards for the best available buy list price with only a 5% fee. And as with all of Card Conduit services, you don't got to sort your cards. You don't got to grade your cards, none of those hassles. You can just safely package them all up and ship them out. And of course, you'll get a detailed report with their results. So you can check out Card Conduit's curated shipment option as a way to buy list up to 150 cards with fast processing, optimized prices, and the low service fee of just 5%. And then you can even get another 10% off by going to cardconduit.com/goldfish. Card Conduit, they're the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. So thanks so much to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And let's talk Innistrad Crimson Vow in Standard. So it's basically release weekend. The set came out on Thursday in digital. We already had tournaments this weekend. So let's just start with first impressions. I'm sure we've all been playing to some extent. What do you think about Crimson Vow Standard?
Oh, it's great. Minus all the green stuff. I don't know. It's pretty awesome, but I do worry because it is, the first week or so. But that's when Alrun's Epiphany and all that stuff makes its way back. On top of that, I realized I might have always just been an extra turns player. I noticed that as soon as I started taking every turn, I beat all the green decks. So, I think I hate green enough to take extra turns. So I kind of have to, that's what I've been doing. I've been enjoying seeing all the new cards though. There's actually a good amount of Crimson Vow stuff hitting the meta. I kind of already thought that Crimson Vow had some of the better of the two Innistrad sets. It always had the better cards. I'm also starting to see cards like, Cemetery Gatekeeper, just really, just using Crimson Vow. I think that's the good thing about this standard so far. I'm just happy that the set came out and it wasn't kind of just completely ignored. And that's pretty major. So, whether it's between the mono green deck, the mono red deck, the mono white deck, or the humans decks, there's so many decks running around right now. And, there's an unrefined control deck, but I think that changes as the weeks pass. And that goes, as I had mentioned, with the Epiphany decks.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Standard too. I feel like In some sense, things are kind of the same. Like mono white's still a thing, mono green's still a thing. You still see the Izzet decks, but we've seen a lot of like different new stuff too that people are testing out: humans and clerics and vampires and some other just kind of weird brews. So it's felt pretty diverse, and I think maybe the biggest development is I'm not sure that Epiphany is the top deck anymore, in all honesty. Like, sure, it's week 1, it's early, things will adjust, but if you look at the tournament results from this weekend, I think that mono white is probably the number 1 deck, with mono green probably number 2, and then you have Izzet somewhere beneath them, with in not really having all that much success on some of the tournaments, thanks to some of the new additions from Crimson Vow. So one of the big worries going into this is just like, Elrond's Epiphany, is anything going to change? And at least for now, for week 1, it seems like the answer is yes. Maybe some of those new additions, like adding Thalia to the format, adding, a green 1-drop that speeds up the deck a little bit more, maybe those additions have actually taken Epiphany off of its throne as the top deck in Standard. I think that's one of my biggest questions. Like, is Epiphany is it dead? Is it, I'm not dead because it's still going to be a thing, but is it no longer the best deck in the format? Or is this just like, it's week 1, everyone plays aggro on week 1. Aggro is one of the worst matchups for Epiphany, and as things adjust, players are going to play more mid-range to beat the aggro decks, and then Epiphany feasts on mid-range, so then Epiphany will come back. What do you guys think? Is Epiphany done in Standard as being the best deck in the format?
Definitely not.
All right, that's calling it a bit too early there. We're getting a little overzealous. For the past couple of weeks, like, mono green has topped the metagame page on Goldfish, right? That's partly due to the fact that Epiphany is split between 2 decks. We have Izzet Control and Izzet Dragons, but it was not like total domination of Epiphany, right? Like, mono green, mono white, and Epiphany were up there, and mono green oftentimes led the metagame. It's just Epiphany is so rage inducing that's all everyone ever talks about on social media. And again, this weekend, we had a couple big tournaments. We had the Hooglandia Open. We had Croaky's Crimson Vow tournament. Epiphany is still there. Like, Epiphany won Hooglandia. So I think it's a little early to call it. I think people are playing with new cards, but I think Epiphany will float around the top regardless, right? Like, maybe mono white gets some new toys, or mono green has some new toys, or maybe a new deck like vampires or clerics does something. But Epiphany, like, you can't. It's like so strong. Like, how can it disappear? I think people will keep forcing it, and it'll like remain there, if not take back its throne, right? I think it'll be a metagame player, but we'll see how it goes. But definitely too early to call it done. Like, I want to see Seth's face when he plays like 5 birds decks afterwards, right? After calling it done, right? Like, there's no way, right? Like, people will still play. There's still good cards.
Yeah.
I don't think it's done, just so it's clear. I don't think it's like, is not a thing anymore, but are we moving past the, like, we need to ban Epiphany stage? Like, do you think, I guess that's the real question, do you think the new additions from Crimson Vow means that the Epiphany decks are just another good deck rather than the deck that everyone is constantly talking about needing to be banned? Or do you think we still are going to be having the conversation of, like, does Epiphany need to be banned? Or does it even matter? Like, does Epiphany still need to be banned, even if it's a tier 2 deck, just because of how miserable the play pattern of Epiphany is? Maybe the win rate doesn't actually make a difference, and people are still going to be salty, because it does kind of suck to lose to extra turn loops and not be able to do anything. What do you think, Grim? Like, are we still talking about banning Epiphany?
I'm playing the card, and I think it still should definitely be banned. It's mostly just the play pattern. I think the play pattern is just completely miserable. I'm just not a fan of extra turn spells. And like, the thing here is, like, the fact that it does tuck itself away means that, like, hey, everyone's just Test of Talents, but Test of Talents does not get it in the foretell zone. So like, whether it's a power level thing, I don't think it's like the like absurdly powerful where it just like completely embarrasses everything. But the thing is that it's just the play pattern is miserable. I also was going to say that I think that the deck could change in that it may not just be Izzet anymore, right? It could be Jeskai, or, for example, like, I've been playing Esper Control with it. And when you have a bunch of hard sweepers, as opposed to like the classic Izzet gameplay, it's very easy to live that long to take all the extra turns.
There's only one source of truth in this, and that's the Magic Arena smiley face.
Oh,
Like, I feel it was never about power level, right? Like the whole time, like Epiphany was not so absurdly overpowered, right? Like it was a strong card. It was just very annoying and people love to meme on it. And I think that doesn't change, right? Like it's just, it feels bad for you to not take any turns, right? For your opponent to take all these turns. So I think the ban worthiness question is always there as long as it's a contender, right? Like if it's like literally a tier 5 deck and garbage, then yeah, like no one's going to talk about it. But as long as it's floating around tier 1 and tier 2, you know, if it creates a negative gameplay experience, like the banning is always on the table, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true. I mean, we've had meme cards like Tibalt's Trickery end up getting banned in various formats, and that's like tier 4 or something. Like that's not even like a real deck, and they're just so obnoxious that they end up getting banned. So I think that's definitely true that the play pattern does play into it. Although I will say, looking at these tournament results and adding in my experience playing on Arena on the Ladder, I'm feeling pretty good about Standard. I'm feeling much better about Standard than I was a couple of weeks ago. Not to say Standard's, you know, great or all time, and I know it's early and I know things are going to shift and adjust, but I was kind of worried that we were going to see, the top 8s of these tournaments are all Epiphany decks again, or all Izzet decks again, and that definitely wasn't the case. It's definitely much more diverse, I would say, than it was before, with a lot of these aggro decks and some of these wild brews showing up. And what do you think about Hullbreaker Horror? or Hullbreacher Horror. That's another card that I've heard some people who are very good at Magic on social media basically saying that it's better than Epiphany. And that's the way Epiphany goes away, is Hullbreaker Horror is just better than Epiphany is as a finisher. What have your experience has been with that card? Have you played with or against it at all, either one of you?
Oh, I've played with it. And it completely pantses. It just like completely bodies the entire Izzet deck. Like if they just bounce it back, I just go, okay, I'll play it again. The thing here is they eventually die to it, right? And the fact that if they don't have the bounce effect on it, you are now going to just like, I could just cast a random spell like a Consider, and then that means I just return the Epiphany back to your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how Epiphany decks beat it once it gets on the battlefield, in all honesty.
But does it do enough against mono green and mono white?
No.
Right? That's
Yeah,
the question. Like obviously in the
seems
control mirror, or, you know, any kind of mirror type, you know, thing, this card is the nuts, right? But will you cast it against mono white? Will you survive long enough? Is it a sideboard card? Is it a main deck card? Is it a metagame card? I don't know. It depends if you can actually use it successfully against other strategies and not just against other blue decks.
I main deck 1. I've hated it every time I've drawn it against an aggro deck. Like every time. I've never once been happy about it. I think it's probably still worth keeping just 1 in the main, and then probably like 1 more in the side, or maybe 3 more if you really want to end the game against the Izzet deck. I think it's actually like stone cold awful against the aggro decks, unless, you know, like for some odd reason you're in such a healthy state that I can play that and then just like pop off with like a Consider. Or it did feel good the one game where I did draw it and then I go like Infernal Grasp and then also bounce another creature.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously good against green. The question is, can you get it on the battlefield quickly enough? And that's not necessarily going to be a yes against a deck like mono green or mono white. Like, it's 7 mana. Like, that's the issue. Once it's on the battlefield, I feel like it's pretty powerful in essentially any matchup. Like, if you untap with it, you bounce all their stuff, and that's great. Against control, it's even greater. But 7 mana is asking a lot. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Maybe there's more control decks that can take advantage of it. When I look at this metagame and I see like mono and mono green, I think there's gotta be someone who's just gonna play a bunch of wraths and just like stick it to these decks that are just flooding the board with creatures. But maybe the creatures are so resilient and you have so many Redanes and Thalias and Azeka's Chariots. I don't know. What do you think, Krim? You're the control master. Like, can you just play a bunch of wraths and beat these decks, or doesn't it really work that way with how these aggro decks are constructed?
Path of Peril has been the truth. It gets under Redane, right? Like, so because the overall CMC of it is 3, right? And then that makes it great. And then 4 mana if there's a Thalia. Also, like Thalia has been relatively easy to deal with from an Esper deck, so I think you can just jam a ton of Wraths. The issue is you just completely get destroyed by like the Izzet deck. So the more you load up on Wraths, the more likely you are to lose to anything that isn't aggro. Vanishing Verse is now just like, if I could, I would make it like a 30 of in my deck. Like Vanishing Verse just is so, like, my deck would just be Vanishing Verse and lands, and like like I'm not even joking you. That card is so good right now. It hits everything. It exiles the green players like snail. Like, it doesn't even matter. Like, whatever they have on the board, it's getting blown up. And it's getting exiled, which is sweet. The only thing that would, for that card right now, is like terrible is the vampire deck. It feels really bad to have Vanishing Verse against vampires.
Yeah, vampires are very multicolor focused with a lot of their best cards. So yeah, it kind of doesn't do a whole lot there. I'm glad you brought that up. That's what I want to ask you all next. What do you think about some of these new decks? Let's start with Vampires. Vampires, I would say, is the Crimson Vow deck that had the best first weekend. It didn't, win any tournaments, but it does show up. If you look through the results of these tournaments, there are Rakdos Vampire decks that had good performances, even though I don't think any of them made the top 8, or maybe one of them snuck into one of the random top 8s, but not many made the top 8s. Do you think that Vampires are actual players in Standard? Like, is this tribal deck actually going to end up being like a legit top tier or second tier option?
I think they're a solid tier 2 aggro deck. I still rank Wolves above it. Wolves definitely way more powerful and definitely aggressive because of that 3-drop wolf that gives stuff haste. And yeah, like, also there's one big difference between black-red vampires and green-red werewolves, and is that green is in it. And green will just forever, like, unless you love vampires, of course, then jam it, have at it. But like, otherwise, I think werewolves is just better. Vampires feels a little bit slow. As in, like, you're playing maybe 1-3-2. You're hoping to take out an army of like white weenie decks and or werewolf decks and or, big beefy green creatures or, all the extra turns. So it's a little awkward.
I gotta say, Anj or Annie or whatever that card is, oh my goodness, it's been so good. It's been so good. I played a bunch of different vampire decks during the pre-release stream, and the one that impressed me the most by far was ones that could actually take advantage of the blood tokens. I feel like that's a pretty powerful build. I will say, Edgar seemed really bad to me in all the vampire decks. I've seen some non-vampire decks play it where it actually looks kind of sweet, just like white-black control decks with a ton of planeswalkers, and you're just kind of like playing it as this weird mid-range threat. It seems interesting there, but in a vampire deck, oh my goodness, it was so disappointing. The other vampire card that really surprised me was actually Blood Vial Purveyor, and I know it's a little swingy and it's a little matchup dependent, but I've certainly played some decks where my opponent just slams a Blood Vial Purveyor and I'm just dead. What am I going to do about it? It's a 5/6 flyer that kills me in like 3 attacks. I'm sure if you're playing, a Crim control deck with 30 Vanishing Verses, probably no big deal. You probably like your opponent playing it. But other decks, that card is actually like legitimately frightening and really difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I have played against it, and I mean, a control deck welcomes it usually, unless you don't have removal, then it's a very quick clock and you die. But if you don't have removal, then you're going to die anyways to anything before it. So, but yeah, like I do think that a few of the vampire cards, the one that actually scared me the most was probably that 3-1 that just keeps coming back when you sack a or 2 blood tokens.
Oh, yeah, that seems very good against a control deck. I guess Vanishing Verse can still snag it, but otherwise, like, whew, that's going to be an issue for you.
Yeah, that card was interesting. I didn't even know it did that. I was like, so this is just a 3-1? Oh, there's the second line. Okay, so there's more. Oh, and then I died. but other than that, I do think that, like, I don't know, did you not feel that Vampires was a bit slow? I mean, it didn't have Asika's Chariot, right? So you weren't doing anything that busted. It didn't have Ranger class, so they weren't just going off left and right. Like, they didn't get to face roll across the keyboard, right? So, like, what is your impression of Vampires? Because I just felt like it was just not there yet.
So vampires, to me, I agree that they're slow, especially if you compare them to like mono white or mono green. Difficult to get as aggressive as wins as those decks. The thing I like about it, though, is I do feel like, especially with all the blood tokens, it's pretty consistent and it's pretty resilient for going long. Like, you have the recursive vampires, you got all these blood tokens to filter through your deck. So I feel like maybe the home for the role of vampires is actually to like try to be a little bit bigger. It probably makes you worse against the Epiphany decks, but I feel like maybe that's how vampires could fight against, mono green and mono white, is rather than trying to be as aggressive as possible, going a little bit bigger with the powerful like 4 drops and 5 drops that the deck has access to, and trying to play a little bit of a longer game with the blood tokens, because you get like good removal with Blood Tithe Harvester. You have these like bomby big threats that can even fight with a lot of the green creatures like Anj and Blood Vial Purveyor. Like, those are cards that can actually, go toe to toe, or the big death touching Vampire Nighthawk thing. They can trade profitably with a lot of the cards the white and green decks are playing. So I think maybe that's Vampire's home, but I do think you're right that as an aggro deck, I feel like Vampires is just like a slow version of mono white or of mono green. Plus your 2 colors, so you got some of the mana issues compared to those other decks. Even though the mana's gotten a lot better in standard, like, it's not going to be as consistent as those monocolor decks. But what do you think, Richard? Have you gotten to play any standard, or have you just been drafting like crazy?
So the story is, I got destroyed in limited, like so destroyed. So last cycle, I started playing standard in Moto. I'm like, this is great. Like, I'm making money. I'm like not losing money. So this time, like, I'll play limited on Moto. And I have not like won anything. I've gone like 1-2 for like 4 drafts. And and normally when I play Arena, I'm like smurfing it with like a 70% win rate, just like racking up the wild cards and stuff, right? I'm like, oh, the people left on Moto are so good. Like, I cannot do this. So with my tail between my legs, I ran and played mono green standard and got some of my confidence back. Snapping the Ancient class. But yeah, I've only played like a single league on with the new standard, and I haven't seen vampires. The format of 5/6 looks intriguing to me. I feel like I want to play Jund or something, but we'll see how it goes. But like, playing mono green, it kind of just feels the same as before the new cards came out. Like yes, they're like new cards, but I'm roughly just doing the same thing, which is like face rolling across the keyboard, and it's still kind of working pretty well. So like, look, if I can go like 10% win rate in limited to like 80% win rate in constructed, that probably tells you something about the quality of decks.
It really shows how strong that green deck is, because I think the green deck got very little from Crimson Vow, really. Like, what new cards are you playing in your green deck? Even? Most of the lists I've seen look pretty much like the old builds.
It got like, I think one of the biggest upgrades it got was 2 new forest printings. Because
I suited up the exact 75. I didn't even adjust my sideboard for the metagame set.
I'm pretty sure the green deck doesn't even need a sideboard. That's like generous that it has a sideboard.
Yeah.
Crim memes on that, but that's actually true. Like, a lot of times I don't touch my sideboard. Like, I have a sideboard for like these. Like, a lot of times you don't need to, right? You're like, the deck is perfect as is. Like, there's no... The main deck is so versatile as is, right? So a lot of times you don't touch your sideboard. It's not like other decks where you're like swapping in like 8 cards. You're just like, I guess.
All right, I gotta ask you guys about 2 more decks, I think, before we move on to other topics. So first, what do you think about this Clerics deck? So Clerics have been floating around for a while, but they've always been pretty not good. But then all of a sudden this weekend, there's a couple of Clerics lists that showed up in the top 8, with Voice of the Blessed being like the huge new addition. I hadn't really considered. I thought of that as a good in Soul Sisters card, which I think it is, but it's also a good in Clerics card. Like, Clerics have Clerics of Life Bond and Chaplain of Alms, which both happen to be like Soul Sisters style effects. So I've played against it a couple times, and Voice of the Blessed is legitimately scary. Like, I have opponents relatively early in the game getting that up to the full 10 counters, like in the course of maybe 2 turns once they get things going, which is kind of frightening. Like, sure, you can still bounce it or whatever, but that is a real threat. Do you think this Clerics deck, thanks to the new edition, like, Is that legit? Are we going to have Clerics be a real deck in Standard?
I mean, it's good against another aggro deck that probably is trying to like burn it out or something, because, you know, they have to be bogged down by actually playing other things than removal. So, yeah, like the aggro matchups, that card is kind of absurd. I think I was playing the humans deck for a video, and I just did not draw my Cathar or whatever, brutal Cathar and or my portable hole. And that thing just got to a 10-10, 11-11 within like 2 turns. And then they played a second one. I'm like, oh my God, how do I beat this card? I've never seen so many humans used to just like try to like block. I had to throw stuff. I had to like animate a flying land to block it. Cause like, wait, we got flying on top of that. Okay. So yeah, that card is very, very sweet. However, I think Clerics is a solid, like, also tier 2 with vampires.
Yeah, it definitely is improved, but I think you're probably right that it's probably not a tier 1 deck, but boy, if you don't draw removal, it can get you real good. Its creatures can get really big real fast.
Oh yeah, and then like what's the 4-mana Cleric that's usually the go-to target to bring it back with? Like
Aura. Aura is actually looking good now, recurring things from the graveyard. It's actually a Pyre of Heroes deck, which is kind of cute too. That's a card that I was kind of hyped about during spoiler season and has done like literally nothing. But it works well with Clerics when you have Aura and some other like recursive synergies, some disturb cards that can come back from the graveyard. So I think the deck's cool. I'm still not sure how good it is, but it does seem cool, and it does seem reasonable against like mono white or mono green at least. You probably get absolutely run over by the control decks, but against other like aggro creature decks, you get life gain, you get big things. Seems like a reasonable option there at least.
I mean,
the other deck.
I was gonna add at the Red Bull Untapped, the highest place for Orzhov Clerics was 292nd. So it did not fare too well. Because I don't know how many of these other decks you're gonna run into, right? Like if you can't win against the top slice of the metagame, you're gonna have a really hard time. But it does look cool. Like a Johnny's Pride Mate is probably like one of the most popular casual cards ever, and the deck is relatively cheap. So maybe if more people play it, be optimized further. Maybe it becomes a real contender at some point.
It's definitely going to be popular on the ladder because me and Krim were talking about this during our top 10 video. I think people just love life gain decks on Arena, and they play a Johnny's Pride. They play the fake Johnny's Pride mates. They don't even exist in paper. Like just anything that's like in a Johnny's Pride mate, you're going to play against like every other round on the ladder. So I'm expecting to see a lot of that deck, whether it's actually good or not. Like people just they love that play style on Arena.
Yeah, like I feel like I see that deck probably more often than I see anything else, and it always ends the same. We're always baffled by it. Like it never wins a lot. They just play it all the time.
It's metagaming against the burn decks, Krim, not your deck, okay?
the burn decks that don't exist.
Yeah, the mono red 1-drops, you know? They've been pushed out of the meta by Orzhov Clerics. That's why they don't exist. Come on.
All right, I gotta ask you about one more deck, and this is the most important question because it's a deck I really want to be good in Standard. What about zombies? Can zombies be a thing? There's a couple of lists that showed up, like the Hooglandia Open. I think someone got maybe top 16 with a Dimir zombie deck. There was a mono black zombie deck, I think, that top 8'd one of the events, but definitely not a huge weekend. What's your impression of zombies? Can zombies be a real deck in our new Standard format?
So I guess the thing here is like the only thing that it's gotten is overcharged amalgam. To be honest with you, I think that's the only thing that really made a difference for the deck. And oddly,
Necroduality, Krim. Necroduality.
Right. You know, the good old turn 4, do nothing pass. And then hope
it lines up well with Azeka's Chariot because you can concede because you know there's no way you're winning if you tap out for it and they play Azeka's Chariot.
You're right. It does line up real well then. Well, I mean, outside of that, I think overcharged amalgam is good in the zombie deck, but it's better anywhere else. So, like, oddly enough, the zombie shell is only holding back the amalgam. But I don't think it got anything new, right? Like, it didn't get anything that's really, really worthwhile. Not yet, at least. Maybe I missed over something, and like there's just some hidden Dimir zombies deck, but legit, it just feels like nothing was really gained from
what
Crimson
is the
Vow.
synergy you get for playing zombies? Like, what is the reward?
The biggest reward, I think, is Champion of the Perished, which
So
that
you get
can be a
1 mana
legitimately
2/2
frightening
or
card.
3/3, and that's it.
I mean, eventually it's like a 1 mana 8/8 or something if it sticks around. I've definitely played against zombies, and I played with zombies some, but your zombie stacks occasionally do have games, so you just go like turn 1 Champion of the Parish, turn 2 Champion of the Parish Shambling Ghast, and you're like, oh, okay. Like, so they do have the face roll wins where they just all of a sudden have these 1-drops that are so big that you can't really stop them. But it is true that they didn't have a great performance. I think Fellstinger is like a legit awesome card, like the Muldrifter exploit 3-drop with Death Touch. Like, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a zombie card either, even though it is technically a zombie scorpion. But I think that is one of the big new things they've gotten. But looking at the deck list, like, I guess Archghoul of Thraben, the uncommon that when a zombie dies, you get to look at the top card of your library and grab a zombie if it's a zombie, or otherwise you can mill it if you want to. But really not a ton of new cards showing up in the deck outside of the Overcharged Amalgam, really.
Y'all,
I think the payoffs just don't make it worth it, right? You could just play Asika's Chariot, right? Rather than like jumping through all of these layers to build some synergy and get like barely any payoff, right? Like, yes, you can play your Lord to give your zombies +1/+0, but your creatures are still smaller than green creatures, right? And they still have less utility than the white creatures. So there needs to be like a really strong payoff, and I'm not sure Necroduality is that payoff card.
Oh, you just wait till my video comes out. There's a Necroduality video coming. You'll all be believers. Check it out Wednesday and against odds. It's coming.
Yeah, pop off against Clerics.
Yeah.
that's just bullying. That's just bullying. You know what isn't actually, I noticed you haven't mentioned that's actually worth a look at? The tempo decks. There's like blue-white tempo, there's blue-black tempo, and I think those decks got
mono blue,
like the mono blue one. There's blue white. There's blue black. Any of those variants, there's a lot there. I was playing a spirits deck on stream the other day, and Dream Shackle Geist is one that really crept up there. I was really surprised to see it do so much. It seems like a joke, right? Like this 3-mana 3/1, but at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1. Tap target creature, or target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. I started stacking these and just countering people out of the game with like Geistlight Snare, all that stuff, and people couldn't deal with it. And Overcharged Amalgam is an honorary spirit at this point because it's amazing. I was just able to like sacrifice stuff, like, you know, the small dinky spirits, and in the tempo decks, like there's like little 1/1s that you don't care about later in the game, and you can upgrade it into a 3/3. So I don't know if the shells are perfect right now, but I do think there's something there.
And I think they probably get better when Kamigawa comes out. I've been messing around with spirits too, but more disturbed spirits with Hallowed Haunting. And oh my goodness, the deck can do some really powerful things. I've actually been pretty impressed with like Dorothea and Catilda. Like, if you got a lot of spirits, Catilda's actually like a legitimately frightening card that comes down as like a 4/4 flying lifelink and then comes back as an aura out of the graveyard. Like, I think there are payoffs for spirits. So that's one that's definitely on my list. I don't know if they'll be top tier right away, but I would not be surprised if sometime in the next year of Standard, before we get to the next rotation, if there's like a really legit spirit stack.
Oh yeah, I mean, once again, in Kamigawa, right? We'll have Robo Spirits or something. But okay. Without going too in depth, because I know we got to get to the next topic. I gotta ask. The most important question is, when you cast the Disturb side of a card, how often do you scream down with the sickness?
every time.
Oh, perfect.
Every time you do that, yeah. All right, let's move forward into a couple other topics while we got time. So Wizards announced today spoiling Innistrad double feature. Richard, what is this third Innistrad set?
All right. So this has been known to us for a while. So today they released a gallery of all the cards, but basically double feature is a box of 24 draft boosters. Each pack contains 15 cards. So you're going to get 8 cards from Crimson Vow and 8 cards from Midnight Hunt. And that's 4 commons, 2 uncommons, and 1 rare. So each pack will have 2 rares, 1 from each set. And then along with that, you get a special new type of card, which is a Silver Screen Foil. It's just a black and white card with a special foiling treatment. So you can see the gallery up on the website, but it's just basically like all the cards from the set. And we were talking about this before cast, but I don't know what the point of this product is. So it's clearly made for drafting. Like they set it up to be draft format. But can you have just taken like packs of, Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow and just drafted them together? So I don't know. What do you guys think about this? Any hype, like silver screen foils? Do we care about this? Is this a real product, or is this just another supplemental that no one will buy?
This product was definitely designed for me. You don't like the black and white look of it? I mean, okay, so I will admit, when I first heard of this, I thought it was going to be a remix of all the Innistrad sets, as in including Eldritch Moon and all of that, Shadows, and of course original Innistrad and Dark Ascension, whatever, right? I thought all of that would have been put on into one set, and this would be one big mega set, which would then lead to its those sets reintroduction or introduction into Arena. And I was like, oh, that'd be brilliant. That's the perfect way to go about it. And now I've found out that it's just the current 2 Innistrad sets, which obviously is fine. Like the paper gamer in me loves it because I love the black and white look. I think that it's great because I love the horror movie aesthetic, and they're really leaning into that. I do not know how I feel about the border of white cards in black and white, although because that actually, the white cards in black and white feel like actually the closest to traditional horror movies. But the blue cards in black and white look really cool, and I can't wait to see what it looks like in person. And the red cards, even the green cards look kind of cool in green borders, right? So I like the borders that actually have color in them, although technically white is the most traditional. Other than that, though, I think this product is all aesthetic. And I guess apparently for drafting.
Why not just sell a collector booster equivalent where the whole pack is just silver screen foils? Why are they?
I think that's what this is essentially.
No, it's 15.
I think you get one.
You get one foil and then 15 reprints from Crimson Vow and.
But in black and white.
No.
Right?
No. The 15 cards are normal.
You get one black and white card per pack.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry. You get 14 normal cards and one foil, which is the black and white foil, and then the other 14 cards are basically
half
Crimson Vow and half Midnight Hunt.
But normal printing?
Just normal, yeah.
What is the point of this release? I thought if I got this, it would essentially just be the booster packs, but in black and white.
It's
Hold on.
you'd be essentially buying packs to open a foil, right? Which really doesn't make much sense, right?
Wait. No. There's no way, right? That you're trolling. Hold on. I'm gonna read this. Wait a minute.
Cancel those pre-orders.
While Krim is reading, I think products like this, I mean, obviously the one per pack, blah blah blah, that's kind of disappointing. I think the big issue though is we have so many different cards these days. I like the black and white cards, but there's 3 different showcase styles every single set that it's hard for me to get hyped about a product like this, just because I don't know, maybe these different borders are losing some of their specialness or something for me, but there's just so many versions of these cards that black and white's cool and I like them, but is it that much cooler than any of the other showcase styles or this border or that border that come out every set? And I don't know if it is that much different or better, so I think that kills it. I do think that Wizards, when they do these return to sets, they definitely should do a remix set alongside it. I would be super hyped if it was what Crim originally thought it was, where it was all the Innistrad sets remixed into a draftable set with a cool treatment on the foils. That would be super hype. That would be good for Arena. That would be good for paper. So I hope they do something like that in the future. If this slot was releasing Innistrad remastered with the old Innistrad sets mixed in with some of these new cards, that would be something that would really get my interest. As it is, I guess it's fine if you want to draft it or if you really want to chase these black and white foils, but otherwise, I don't know, 95% of the packs are just the same cards that you opened in Crimson Vow or the same cards you opened in Midnight Hunt. So not super hype, but what did you find, Grim?
Update. It is exactly as you said. This sucks.
It just makes no sense. They could just put like original Innistrad, like the 14 normal cards. Like, why don't they just print original Innistrad or Shadows? Because all these products are available to buy on the shelves right now, right? Like, what's the point of splitting this? And if you want special cards, aren't you better off just buying like collector or set boosters from
For the singles.
for the previous cards, right? So yeah, just like see if no one opens these packs, these singles are going to be like crazy expensive. So yeah.
I guess, wait, okay, would you buy these if they were what I thought they were, which was a pack that was pretty much Crimson Vow, and whatever, the Midnight Hunt, but just all black and white. Like every card had the silver screen treatment.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense.
If it was all black and white,
yeah.
If it was all black and white, I'd probably buy it. I would probably buy it honestly over the normal sets, just because I think the black and white's cooler looking than normal cards. So yeah, if it was all black and white, I think I would. But one per pack, no.
Yeah,
I'd just buy collector booster, honestly.
The one per pack hits me a little bit in the sad spot there, because like right in the feels, because I thought this was going to be all black and white, and now I'm very sad. And granted that I built that expectation for myself, but regardless, that's just because logically that's where I thought it would go. Well, why only one silver screen? Then yeah, like, okay, this then goes back to the original point, which is, wait, why are you buying this?
And then there's also the bigger question of, will it Pringle, right? Like, it's another new experimental WotC foiling, right? Like, I don't know what this is going to look like, right? Like, we haven't seen silver screen foils before. And will they bend? Will they, are they double the thickness of a normal card? Like, I don't know how they feel in hand. So, yeah. A lot of questions.
Well, speaking of special cards, we got one more quick topic before we hit up Fishmail, and that is there was a secret lair that someone opened in the past week, and in this secret lair, there was a Viscera Seer that no one knew about, just one of those random cards that pops out of a secret lair drop, but the Viscera Seer was printed backwards, and it was numbered 77 of 100, presumably meaning there's 100 of these in existence. These backwards Viscera Seers. Really curious what you guys think about this. I don't collect sports cards, but I keep up a little bit on the sports card market because I think it's interesting. And I know this is something that's really, really big. We talked about this like a year ago, I think, about these box breaks that sports cards do. And they're looking for these 1 of 5 cards, 1 of 10 cards, 1 of 1 cards, and how that's essentially what the sports cards market is about now. And we were wondering, when is Wizards going to start doing this? And it seems like the answer is now with this 77 of 100 Viscera Seer. Do you think this is a good thing for the game? Seeing Wizards go towards these super, super limited print run collectible type cards. What do you think of the backwards Viscera Seer?
I mean, what do I think of the card or the idea behind it? Because the idea behind it doesn't bother me. Like I may not want to go buy a backwards Viscera Seer for like, I don't know, $32 million or whatever, but like, it's a collectible card game. I expect some kind of random collectible things happening, right? If this were like, oh, by the way, we have an exclusive card that does something that you can't get anywhere else, then that'd be problematic. But other than that, it's just like, cool, collectible Seer backwards. I'll never play it. It'll be funny to run into, because I don't read my cards anyway, so everything's already backwards. So yeah.
Oh, what do you think, Richard?
I agree with Grim. I think the general idea of having collectible cards is fine. I don't know why it's Viscera Seer. I don't know why that's limited edition, and I don't know why it's backwards. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it would make a lot more sense if they released, like, the Dracula showcase cards, instead of putting them in the set, making them a, out of 100 Dracula card for Chase Mythic in Standard, right? Then I'm like, I get it, right? Like, someone will want to buy it. There's like high demand, but this is weird. And why is it backwards? Like, what happened to, is it worth it? Like, they're pretending it's a misprint, but it's not. And then it's just hard to read. And we're like, is this fake? Is this an error? I can't even tell anymore, right? Like, I don't know, right? So it's just weird. Like, why not have fancy art or anything? Like, why is it backwards? Confused.
Yeah. That's the part that gets me too. I'm perfectly fine with Wizards doing 1 of 100. I'm perfectly fine with them printing a 1 of 1 Soul Ring or something and having, $1,000 booster pack that's all these super exclusive cards like sports cards do. That's fine as long as it's reprints, as Krim said. Like as long as it's reprints and you can get a 10-cent Viscera somewhere, go to town with whatever you want to do. I do think the backwards thing is actually a little bit cheesy. Like, I don't know. You remember when people would buy sheets and miscut them on purpose to make their own misprints because then they could sell them for more money? It kind of feels like Wizards trying to do that. Like, I feel like the idea of like, oh, like here's this misprint that's not really a misprint. I don't know. Like the exact way they made this card feels a little bit corny to me, a little bit cheesy to me, but I'm perfectly fine with, these random collectible cards. I will never go out and spend hundreds of dollars on this, 1 of 100 Viscera, but there's probably people who will, and, more power to them. Like that's perfectly fine with me. But yeah, I do think the backwards thing is a little bit weird. And I don't know, I think this does open the door to some really expensive booster products. Remember people complaining about like the double masters packs that were $100? I would not be surprised if we see even more expensive products coming in the future where you're guaranteed to get 1 of whatever cards, that are signed by the artist or have, Mark Rosewater's toenail clippings or whatever in them, the stuff that we talked about before. But I think this is the first step towards doing that. So it'll be interesting to see where it ends up. All right, so next up, we're joined by a super special guest to talk a little bit about stuff coming up in the Legacy and Vintage world, and that is Joe Dyer, who writes This Week in Legacy and Vintage 101 on the site. Joe, how you doing today? Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm doing great. Thanks, guys, for having me.
So I know that Eternal Weekend 2021 is kind of around the corner and a little bit different this time. We still got some of the COVID stuff, so I believe it's going to be a online event this time. But we wanted to have you on and talk a little bit about what Eternal Weekend is, how people can participate, how they can maybe find some decks to play in it if they're interested. So, Joe, how are they doing Eternal Weekend in 2021?
So, like last year, we're doing Eternal Weekend online again this year. And what that entails is 2 separate weekends worth of events where each weekend has 3 different events. And so you get to play in 3 different events where each event is for a different prize. And that prize is a full art card art that is a big piece of art painted on a card that says, Legacy or Vintage Champion on it. And so you pick which one event you want to play in, and that's the portrait you're going to play for.
Ooh, the art, I believe I saw in an article, it's got like Wasteland and Bayou and Sylvan Library, and the art actually looks really sweet. So it's actually kind of a really unique prize, I guess. And this is sort of a Eternal Weekend thing, right? These big art prizes is something with the big cards in the art. That's something that they've done for a long time with Eternal Weekend, I think.
Yes, yeah, that's kind of an Eternal Weekend tradition. They've always done these for the events for Eternal Weekend. Even when we were doing them in paper, they were having these large cards.
So they're doing this on Magic Online. When are the actual events? Do you know what weekends they're doing these?
So the Legacy events are actually this weekend, November 19th, Saturday, November 20th, and Sunday, November 21st. That is the Wasteland event on Friday, the Bayou event on Saturday, and the Sylvan Library event on Sunday. And then the following weekend is the Vintage events. So that's Thanksgiving, Black Friday weekend. And that's for a Mox Emerald on Friday, Time Twister on Saturday, and Mox Ruby on Sunday.
Ooh, so that actually sounds pretty sweet. So giving people something to do over the holiday weekend when maybe people have time off of work. So let's say people want to join these events. How do they actually do that? Is it just like a normal Magic Online event where you go into the queue, or is it a little more complicated than that?
It's not super complicated. There is what they call an Eternal Weekend entry token. Those tokens are $25. So entry, if you wanted to enter all 3 of the Legacy events, for example, that would be $75. You have to buy a token for every event you want to get into. However, one of the great things about these events is that if you buy an Eternal Weekend entry token, that starts today, actually. Today, November 15th, 10 a.m. Pacific time, is when they'll be on sale in the Magic Online store. And when you buy the token, You restart your client, and you will have access to pretty much every card on Magic Online until Wednesday, December 1st. So it's about 16 days worth of all access to where you can build, you can play whatever you want, not just for these events. You can play in leagues, you can play in challenges, constructed tournament practice room, anything. So you can build pretty much every deck in the format and just play with anything.
Yeah, they've done a couple of events like this in the past where you can get these tickets and you get all the cards on the client. And I remember actually like calculating it. And while it's only for a limited time only, the price is actually pretty fair when you compare it to like loan programs and stuff like that. For those couple of weeks to have access to all the cards, like even on Magic Online, a legacy or vintage deck is going to cost several $100 and maybe even up to like $1,000 or more depending on the deck. So being able to get access to all the decks for 2 weeks for a pretty low price is kind of appealing. So I guess if you're thinking about playing the events, you should probably sign up and get the ticket soon, because then you're going to get more for your money, essentially being able to use those cards for longer.
Right. And also you'll be able to have more time to practice, especially if you're newer to the format.
Well, speaking of being newer to the format, the last thing I wanted to ask you, I know all the, old timer vintage and legacy players, they probably know what they're playing. They're up on the metagame. They got their decks and, they're going to have a brew ready for these events. What if you are new to these formats, but you're interested in vintage or legacy and you think, wow, this is a pretty good deal. $25. I get all the cards for 2 weeks. This is my chance. How would someone like that find a deck to play, figure out what deck to play? You got any advice for those type of players?
Yeah, actually, besides just content creators, I have actually been putting together a lot of content on that as well. My article that's coming out this week is going to talk about several legacy decks that are good for players to kind of get into, with some links to other content on those decks so that you can kind of go dive into that. I've been doing stuff with the vintage side of things with these little mini cram sessions on various decks. So I kind of trying to equate them to other decks and other formats that players may already be familiar with, and to kind of show, hey, this is what your play style is. If you enjoy this kind of deck, this is a deck in this format that you might enjoy. And so it makes it a little nice to kind of get into that. And some of the decks I'm talking about, like example in Legacy, one of the decks I'm going to be talking about pretty extensively is Death and Taxes, because that deck is very good right now in Legacy. But it's also a deck that requires a lot of metagame knowledge and a lot of understanding. But thankfully, one of the best D&T players in the world, John Ryan Hamilton, has written a ton of documentation out there on D&T and how to play it. So it's a deck that's hard to play, but it's got a lot of content out there to actually learn it. So that's kind of nice. So I'm trying to lean on those kinds of decks that have a lot of not easy. They're not all, nothing's ever going to be easy to get into, but they're easy to get into because there's a lot of resources available to learn them.
Oh yeah, that sounds super helpful for new players. So when do your articles actually go up if players want to check those out to get ready for these big Eternal Weekend events?
So my articles for Legacy go up on Tuesdays. My articles for Vintage go up on Thursdays. The articles for Vintage have already started covering this. So if you're interested in playing Vintage, definitely check those out. I definitely do recommend trying Vintage out. A lot of players may feel daunted by that format, but it's actually really fun right now.
Yeah, I'm about due for some more Vintage. It's been a minute, but I do love the Vintage format. And yeah, I'm excited for these events. I might try to sneak into one of them over the holiday weekend because that sounds super fun. So yeah. Anyway, anything else, Joe, before we kind of wrap things up with our Eternal Weekend coverage?
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to add was that especially for the Legacy Eternal Weekend this weekend, if you were actually planning on playing in this event, I also help run a project called the Legacy Data Collection Project, where we collect information on the various Magic Online challenges and stuff like that. And I am looking for people to assist with data collection for these events because they're going to be long 8 to 10 round events. And I definitely need people to kind of help jump in and get data for us.
If they want to help, where do they contact you, or who should they get in contact with to help out with that?
On my Twitter account, at VorethXP is a good place. There's also every data sheet that I publish on my Twitter for that. There's a Discord link. They can follow that and come to our Discord and help us out with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us for a few minutes, Joe, to talk about Eternal Weekend. And I assume you're going to be playing the event, so good luck. Have fun.
Yeah, I plan on at least playing in one of each. I'm going to be slightly busy this weekend on Legacy because Saturday I actually have a paper Legacy event on Saturday. Ooh. And so I'm going to be playing in the Sunday Legacy one and probably the Sunday Vintage one.
Awesome. Well, anyway, check out Joe's articles going up Tuesday and Thursday in the site. And then, of course, Eternal Weekend happening the next 2 weekends over on Magic Online. So thanks again for joining us, Joe. Definitely appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Anyway, I think we better hit up a Fishmail or two. Richard.
All right.
Take it away.
If you have questions, send them to @MTGGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail. We'll get to your questions on air. Liv Parker, I missed the time when I started playing Magic, and me and my friends have this kitchen table mentality where we played with what we had, or maybe bought very few cheap rares with LGS to strengthen our jank. Any idea on how to bring that feeling back?
I think that's Commander. Right? Like you can, because then Commander, you can do whatever, right? You don't have to play with others. You could just play within your own play group, set house rules.
Yeah, I think
I think Commander with house rules, right? Like you're like, okay, let's all go to LGS and we have $25 each. Like buy whatever cards you need and away we go. Like basically, I think budget restrictions or like theme restrictions and things like that will bring back that feeling, because I feel like we get that kitchen table mentality on Commander Clash where we just like randomly throw up jank themes like, okay, only Ice Age and before, and then you're forced to play with these cards you would never play with normally, but they're just as fun as regular Magic cards, right? So I think, and that's basically what happened when you were a kid, right? You had like an actual budget, right? And you had like supply issues. You couldn't just buy cards online and get them shipped to your house. You had to go to LGS, dig in that bulk pile, find that like 30-cent steal. So I think restrictions is the key to making it more casual.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't think there's any way to make that happen like on Arena, or if you're playing with, random people at your local game store or whatever. But if you have your own play group, then there's all kinds of things you can do with restrictions that can kind of, bring back that feeling. So I think you're exactly right. Commander is probably the easiest format to do it in. And then if you got a play group, you can make whatever restrictions you want, and that'll kind of bring that feeling back. So I think that's definitely the direction to head.
All right. Gogo Gaga Zubaba. How the heck do I get into Modern? I have a full-time job and make good money, but it seems unfathomable to me the money I have to spend to make a Modern deck. Do I start small and make a budget deck, or do I bite the bullet and shell out $10K for Jund? Help.
My advice would be to make a budget deck. There are some very competitive budget decks that you can take to LGS and play to FNM and have some success with. The 8-whack style decks is one I usually go to, or 12-whack now. Those are decks that you can build for around $100 and actually compete with. Burn can also be pretty competitive on the budget. We got a whole series of budget decks for Modern. I made a ton of budget decks, so you can check them out over on the website. But that would be my advice, especially now in the era of Modern Horizons when things change so quickly. Start small and build your collection that way, because you never know if you go out and spend $10,000 on Jund when, something's going to come out and invalidate most of the deck that you spend your money on a year later or something. So I would definitely be on the start small and build up from there stage, personally at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would not recommend buying Jund. I would recommend just getting your foot in the door, playing the format. And then as you play other decks, you'll get a feel of what you like and what you want to play. And then you can invest at that point. But it would feel really bad to, spend $10K on Jund and then be like, this deck sucks, I don't want it anymore. And then you're out like a lot of money, right? So I would start small and then explore the format, and then you'll get a better idea of what you actually like.
And just so it's clear, Jund's like $1,500 or something like that, $2,000 at the top. So it's not literally 10K. It's a little hyperbolic. Just before everyone yells at us in the comments that it's not really 10K.
Sure feels like 10K, but like rotating in monkey sets and stuff like that. You just throw out your whole deck and buy some lures.
Just know that once you start playing red and green, then you look at Ren and 6, and yeah.
Yeah, but start small. I would play like, a cheap deck like Seth said, and then you can invest in a more expensive deck once you figured it out. Speaking of expensive, BM Sullivan, why is the Fairy Time Raveler so expensive on Moto? It's widely played, but it's a non-mythic from a recent standard set. It's the third most expensive card in Modern. No non-Horizons card is even close. Is the supply of War of the Spark abnormally low?
So here's the issue with cards on Magic Online right now. Basically, Arena came out. Many limited players, except for the really hardcore grinders at Stomp Richard, they switched over to Arena to play limited, and that has really pinched the supply on cards. The main way cards come into Magic Online are through people drafting, and for the last couple of years since Arena came out, there hasn't been nearly as much drafting, which means not as many Teferi Time Ravelers or whatever in existence. The good news is standard play is also mostly shift to Arena, so the thing that gets really hit hard are rares in Mythics that end up being playable in Eternal formats. When you have a Teferi, which is a staple in Modern and in Legacy, there's just not that many to go around compared to the amount of Modern and Legacy players there are that need them on Magic Online, and the price gets really crazy. We've seen this with a lot of cards, actually. Anything that's even like slightly playable in older formats ends up getting really expensive on Magic Online. So basically that's what's happening. Teferi is kind of an extreme example because it is a rare and it happens more with Mythics, but Teferi is also an extreme example because it is just really heavily played in older formats. It is a true staple, one of the most, it's in 30% of Modern decks, 4 copies per deck. It's just in so many decks. So that's basically what's going on. And it was like, it's up to $50 now. It was closer to 20 just a couple months ago. So the other part of it is it's really taken off since Modern Horizons 2 has shifted the metagame. And there's just a lot of decks that take advantage of it. It's one of the best hate cards to fight against the Cascade style decks. So it's very in demand. But that's the basic issue is supply is low because limited switch to Arena, but demand is very high because Teferi's kind of busted.
All right. And last question from James Law. A lot of people complain about Alrund's Epiphany, and now creatures do so much in Standard. Werewolf Pack Leader is a 2-mana 3/3 that can draw cards and self-buff later on. Should WotC go back to the early days of super strong spells over strong creatures?
I would like that.
I don't think I would. I mean, Alrund's Epiphany is pretty busted. I think a middle ground. I think that's where I would like to see things end up, is strong creatures, but also strong spells. I feel like the pendulum swung really far in one direction. The early days, spells were too strong and creatures were too weak. And then maybe we overcorrected and creatures became too strong and spells were too weak.
Maybe?
But I hope
we did.
Well, okay, definitely. But I think we're maybe trending back in a good direction where standard cards seem to be powered down a little bit, some of the threats compared to where they were a couple of years ago. And we've gotten some pretty solid spells over the last couple sets. Not, Balance and Black Lotus and Soul Ring and that level of power. But I feel like maybe things are normalizing and heading towards a happy medium. So I think the early days were bad. I think the creatures being busted and spells being horrible were bad. But I think we can end up in a good spot where maybe we have, roughly things at parity and on balance.
I think they need to change the way the creatures are strong. I would like to see a 2-mana 5/5, right? Something where you don't snowball the game out of control. You just take 15 to the face and stabilize. I'm not even sure, is a 2-mana 5/5 too strong or too weak? Right? Maybe it needs to be a 2-mana 6/6. I don't know, right? Like, would you rather play a Werewolf Pack Leader or like a Giant Tarmogoyf? But there's got to be at some point where the game just doesn't snowball out of control and you don't just draw a million cards and like lock up the game. And if we go back to that kind of playstyle, I think I'd be much happier. Like a 1-mana 3/3 that does nothing instead of like ramping you and like drawing you cards, right? Like just literally 1-mana 3/3 non-legendary, or 1-mana 4/4, and like that's it, right? You have 4 turns to answer it before you die, and they don't take over the game if it's not answered for 3 turns. So yeah, I think maybe change the way spells are strong and maybe change the way creatures are strong, but the relative power is okay, right? I mean, like if you invest 8 mana in a spell or 7 mana Alrund's Epiphany, like it should be strong, right? But maybe not like strong in a miserable game ending way, but strong in another way.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
That's all the time we have for questions this week. Thank you to everyone who sent them in. If you have questions, send them to @MTGGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail. We got to your questions on air.
And I believe that brings us to the end of episode 355 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. So Richard, Krim, thanks for hanging out. Thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And we will be back next week to talk about whatever goes on in the world of Magic. So until then, have a wonderful week, everyone. And this is the crew signing out.